Good afternoon. I'm Ron Moore of Moore Gallery, and we're in our Hess Street gallery this afternoon to spend a half an hour with David Bolduc. We're currently having an exhibition of David's paintings running from October the 14th until November the 7th. This is, in my opinion, a very interesting exhibition. David is one of the most prominent young painters in Canada today. And I think you'll enjoy the next half hour talking with David about his life. This is David beside me. David, how are you today?
Pretty good, Ron.
Good. Anyways, let's get right into the meat of things. And I know that you were born in Toronto in 1945. Maybe you can start from an early age and give us some of the background of your life.
Well, it's a pretty classic Toronto childhood. Mostly I grew up in the beaches, that area of town, the East End, along the Scarborough Bluffs. A little bit later on, I went to school in Toronto. Nothing exceptional, I think. So how it would work, I guess, would be I grew up in a part of Toronto that was probably just on the edge of the suburbs, on the urban side of the suburbs. So I had access to the city as a child, and I also had access to, as I said, the Scarborough Bluffs, the beach, lots of ravines. So I had probably the best part of Toronto. And as a child, I had access again to the ROM, the Royal Ontario Museum. I belonged to clubs there as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go to the AGO, the Art Gallery of Ontario. So elementary school, high school, my parents are Catholic. So I had a Catholic education. So I went to a Catholic boys' high school. And then after a while, I went to a regular high school. And in the last years of that, I was taking classes, life drawing classes at the New School of Art in Toronto in the evenings, Friday evenings.
What age were you at that time?
Oh, I don't know, about 15 or 16.
So this was the beginning of your art interest?
It was the beginning of any formal interest in art.
Yeah.
It was not the beginning of drawing for whatever purpose children draw. I had drawn and made copies of things since ever since I can remember, like most children. It's essentially model making of a sort.
Mm-hmm.
Now I did the other kind of model making where you make planes and tanks, but most of the things around me would be organized in a graphic way.
Mm-hmm.
I would do drawings of my environment, and I still do, and that's in much the same way.
Did you, at an early age, have any direct influence from your parents or anyone in your family as far as art was concerned, or was this something sort of far and away from everyone else in your family?
Well, it was far away in the sense that one lived in a middle-class environment where, in Canada, at any rate, art does not have a major part to play in growing up or day-to-day activity. My mother was a painter, painted and drew. My father was a jeweler, so he was very good with his hands. And I had an uncle on my father's side who had tried to make it as an artist earlier in the 40s, and had moved into commercial art and into other things. But there was certainly a lot of sympathy for this idea of rendering the world graphically.
So basically your parents were supportive in the early years as far as art was concerned?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, it was something to keep you quiet.
Okay, let's spend some time and talk about your schooling with the Ontario College of Art and the Montreal School of Fine Art. I'm sure those were interesting years for you.
Well, like I said, I was going to the new school at night, and it was on Bloor Street near University, behind what was then the Brook Bond Tea Company. I don't know what it would be now, the CIL building. Rick Gorman seemed to be running it at that point, and I was taking life classes. And then I would go from the life classes when they ended in the evening, and I would go down to usually the Bohemian Embassy in Toronto, a nightclub. And at this point, a lot of the music that's popular now had started off in places like that. So I think the only paintings that were up at the time were Ziggy Blazia's first paintings, oddly enough. But as I was saying earlier, I saw Rick Gorman's early underground movies there. I saw a lot of jazz, certainly a lot of folk singing, a lot of poetry readings. So at this point, before I went to the Ontario College of Art, I was gradually becoming more and more interested in if not an artistic world, certainly a literary world.
Mm-hmm. You were quite young at that time, I believe 19.
Probably younger at this point.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So
So the
that-
Ontario College of Art at this point would let you in without a portfolio or without an entrance exam. I think Ryerson did too at that time.
So you spent, what, 1 year there, or was it 2
I
years?
spent a year, their foundation year, with Carl Schaefer and a few other people,
Mm-hmm.
some of whom were very interesting. And then spent a summer painting and doing a number of things. And then went back for my second year, went into drawing and painting specifically, and found I didn't like it very much, and quit after a few months. And worked at various jobs. What would they be? Mostly libraries, bookstores.
Mm-hmm.
I was living with a group of other people in what became the Coach House Press at the time. And then at that time, there was obviously no living to be made from making paintings or sculpture or collages or any of the things I was interested in doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it became very obvious to me that if I continued working in bookstores or as a technician in a library, I still would have barely enough money to afford supplies. So I decided to go back to school again and put a portfolio together and went to Montreal and talked to Arthur Lismer, who was at that time running the School of the Musée des Beaux-Arts. It was sometimes called the School of or the School of Art and Design, and consequently ended up being put into a second-year class there and staying for another year, sort of a fairly formal education. Lismer was the most interesting person in one respect, but then there was a design teacher called Jean Gauguin, who teaches at Sir George now, who was very involved with hard edge painting or plasticien or a certain Montreal color painting, whatever you want to call it. So he, through his interest in design, I became very much interested in the work of Molinari and Roy Cayuca and Patterson Ewan and Toussaint and most of the people who were prominent in Montreal at that time, getting to know Henry Sachs and Cayuca more than the others. And a number of other people whose names I can't remember,
Mm-hmm.
but are still prominent on the Montreal scene.
So these were people early in your career that had some influence on you.
They were far more accessible than it seemed most of the artists were in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
Montreal then, and still is, a much more interesting scene in that respect, where because there's so very little money, the competition is for jobs. It's not for selling work. And that's my theory.
I see.
So you get to meet a wider range of writers and artists and video people and performance artists in Montreal as a painter, where in Toronto I would find myself associating mostly with painters and writers.
Right. And of that group, I know that you've mentioned to me that there's a number of well-known Canadian artists that, of course, you associated with at that time. Graham Coftree, Gordon Rayner.
These I had
people.
known through other people in Toronto, and I'd kept up with their shows. And it was only when I moved back to Toronto that I began to know them through other people that were of my particular generation: Bart Scholes,
Mm-hmm.
Tom Sinew, John McGregor, Jerry McAdam, people like that. Jim Jones of the Artist Jazz Band was part of the Coach House group. So it was an intermingling of groups. The more you got to know one group, the more you got interlocked with other groups, which seems sensible.
Mm-hmm. Of the artists that we're discussing between Montreal and Toronto, which of the movements do you think more directly influenced you as far as your painting was concerned?
Well, both did to a great degree. I don't know how you could put it. It seemed at the time that people in Toronto were trained to draw very specific things in a very specific way, in you could say a Beaux-Arts tradition. But if we're drawing a table, they would draw the table as it was, with straight lines and parallel lines and 90-degree angles, where in Montreal things were done expressively. You would sort of messy kind of a drawing. So in Toronto, the painting seemed to grow out of this attitude towards drawing, where in Montreal it grew out of an attitude, it seemed, to design, to composing. And through Molinari and Kiyuka and all these people through color. So while I was in Montreal, I was very involved with a very abstract, geometric kind of color painting. And when I came back to Toronto, it was coming back into a different tradition. So the painting sort of bumped up against it, and sometimes it intermingled, and sometimes it was thrown, rebuffed. So I come out of both traditions, oddly enough, which is kind of nice. And when I have my name is French. The Bolduc is a very old French name in Quebec. I speak English, of course. So I'm, again, part of this national schizophrenia.
Right. Because your paintings, to me, have a very expressionistic direction to them. They're very
this comes
powerful.
out of people like Gord Rayner and Dennis Burton and Graham Coftry and a number of others.
Yep.
Jack Bush is a prime example of this, of somebody coming out of, I don't know where he's from. Is he from Montreal originally, Jack? I think he might have been.
I believe, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So again, you have the same problem. You have this, this urge to order, and at the same time an urge to mess things up. Coftry is another example of that, of a straight figurative painter in the Montreal tradition who looks very French in Toronto, but he's become the epitome of Toronto painting to some degree.
Yes, that's right.
But I think Gord Rayner stands as a better model for a lot of this, though.
Yeah.
In that the work goes from being collage, figurative, abstract, geometric. As I wrote in a catalog at one point, he doesn't seem to observe any kind of fence boundaries. He just goes wherever he feels like going. And I think as a model, it's who I've taken. A lot of his early work has left a profound impression on me. Mike Snow, again, the same thing. A lot of the early work is very loose and left-hand side of the brain, if you like, and a lot of the work we know him for is very, very formal. But it always has this gritty edge to it.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's neither here nor there. That may be the problem with Canadian arts acceptance internationally. It always seems to have a foot in both camps.
Well, it makes it interesting, that's for sure. It doesn't leave you bored. Let's spend a little time talking about traveling. You've even from your childhood, your parents traveled, and you, of course, have spent a lot of time outside Canada. How was that? Maybe you can spend some time talking about your place in Portugal and your time that you spent in Europe, and how you think that has influenced you.
It just, first of all, it gives you a different worldview. You stop accepting all the little rules you have for, in my case, painting or living, and travel broadens, as the cliche goes. But again, I come from a generation of people born in 1945. This was, the troops came home, people bought cars, people drove around. They stopped living in one place for vast periods of time. They stopped having the same job forever and ever. It was a period of flux in North America, and my parents were part of that, as I'm sure yours were.
Mm-hmm.
So we would get in the car and we would drive. And being in Toronto, you would spend your summers in Northern Ontario, or Quebec City, or Fort Lauderdale, just as a matter of course. And it seemed that simple, when you're a little older, just get on the road and start hitchhiking or do whatever. And when you got some money together, you went to Europe. And then I went to Europe, and then I kept going to Central Asia and ended up in India, like a whole generation of people. And I got to like it. But it broadened in the sense that after you've taken your Toronto or Montreal attitudes towards art and life and had them strained through India a little bit, they get a little ragged. You no longer believe everything as implicitly as you did before. You no longer see the world as a rock. You see it as shifting sand. Your worldview changes.
You become
And,
a little more flexible is what you're basically
well,
saying.
you not only become flexible, but the ideas about how you saw painting relating to your life and relating to the world in general, you see as being a little provincial, a little bit insular, a little bit childish. The world is not interested in art. It's got its own problems. The kind of art I was doing before I went to India for the first time, it changed dramatically when I came back. I could no longer accept any of the things that I had done as being, rote or perfectly true.
We talked a little bit about that in regard to this exhibition. There's two paintings in front of us, one very different from the other, but also very similar in that the painting on the left-hand sen has a abstract central image in a landscape, and the second picture, which is called Late Light, is again a central image which is more a tree in a landscape. And maybe you can explain to us briefly the differences in these paintings and why they are different.
Oh, they span quite a bit, but the first thing is quite a bit of time. The first thing is the centralizing of the image gets rid of the problem of having to structure something, to make up a composition. And it's a formal consideration in the sense that most of the ways of composing a picture or a photograph or whatever have been used so many thousands of times that they're just conventions. They have no particular meaning finally, or the particular meaning they have comes from the convention they represent. So in a sense, what one tries to do is to break the back of this particular problem by centralizing everything, by eliminating essentially composition. So the image is centralized, it's put right into the middle of an area of space, a frame of reference. It's accepted that this is the focus. It's accepted that there is a front and a back. The image represents the front of the picture. What's behind the image represents the back of it. They can either be in conjunction or they can be separate. This provides the motivation for the composition. The landscape problem is, again, if we talk about art having something to do with where we are and who we are and what's going on around us, the problem I had with India, to go back a bit, was that all of the concepts about art that I had were very cold, mathematical. They were concepts that existed within the art world specifically. In other words, they had a life of their own. One was pushing the boundaries of painting, to take one phrase from the time. Now, to push the boundaries of painting is one thing. To push the boundaries of painting as an object that has some meaning in society is something else completely different. Now, by pushing the boundaries of painting in Toronto, I was producing a kind of quasi-industrial object that had a specific meaning within an urban North American environment. But I found in India it had absolutely no meaning whatsoever. It was just a bunch of conventions strung together that depended wholly on an act of faith, or a leap of faith, if you like. And this was the first kind of major doubting that I think one has about painting, or major doubt, to put it in a better way. And as I was saying earlier in a private conversation, I've lived the last couple of years in Portugal, or it seems the last couple of years. It was a little bit farther away than that, where I was living in the country, and a country in Europe, where the world around me was primarily 18th century, not 19th century, 18th century. It was people with donkeys. There were 2 growing seasons during the year. The people around me would, you'd watch them graft the grapevines and make the wine. It was a whole other world. And again, the concepts about art and the way art related to my world had absolutely no meaning for me there, or they seemed rather stupid and specious. And as time went on, you realized you were living in a world where all your sensory input was not buildings and industrial concepts or art concepts, but it was sunsets and sunrises and things growing and things dying and wind and weather. And it made sense to think in terms of what you were producing, in terms of what you were seeing, what was passing through your eyes and through your brain, and finally coming out the other end, in this instance in paintings or in representational objects. So I went back to doing what I had done as a child and what I had done in all the cottages I've been to, and wherever I have been. I started painting what was in front of me, exactly what was in front of me.
The exhibition that we have today, David, consists of paintings over a number of years with a variety of different images. Maybe you can tie it all together for us.
Well, yeah, it's probably confusing if you wonder how one person could have done all these different pictures, because they all usually tend to look quite a bit different. But if we start seeing it in themes that have been very important to me, if we talk about India, what comes out of that is the idea that most of the world doesn't have wall art the way we have it, but it has decoration. And decoration and clothing and fabrics on the walls, on their trucks, on their animals. Man-made decorations, patterning of this sort. This led me into a lot of the little patterning bits you see in the pictures. This became far more fascinating to me than a lot of the Western concepts that dominated art of that period. So we have a little bit of this. We have a sense of the painting as fabric. And we have my interest in decorative fabrics, which I've been collecting Oriental textiles for about 10 years now, maybe longer, 15. And very heavily involved in most of the Arab and the Japanese decoration. And at this point, it goes on a little bit farther, where the other main theme is this one of landscape, which dominates most Canadian art. It's not only did it dominate English art of the Romantic period, but it dominates Canadian art of the last 100 years for many of the same reasons. We have, the bush here and factories over here, and there's this kind of alienation about wondering which one are we in? Why do we keep seeming to switch back and forth? Our identity has this confused aspect to it. And mine, from living in the country, whether it's Portugal or wherever, I'm living in a world that exists with all of this natural phenomena. There's what used to be the natural world, and then there's the man-made world, and it's all intertwined now, but it still exists as an intertwined situation. So the paintings go again back, to keep coming back to landscape. They keep coming back to a landscape that grows up on the two-dimensional surface by utilizing certain types of patterning, certain kind of color effects that are from phenomena, but are also, again, from the abstract, from carpets, from all these concepts that govern time and movement and change. Go from the landscape to the pattern and then back again, and then they're put back together by me in what I hope is a reasonable way that makes some kind of visual sense or a visual type of logic. Now, I obviously don't know if this is true. I know it's true for me when the picture is finished, that it exists as a model of the world as I'm sort of apprehending it. But whether it does for anybody else is, again, this kind of very odd doubt.
Yes,
I think it lies at the bottom of all art.
Yeah, it's a very personal statement.
Well, yeah, it's a personal statement that has to exist as an objective, non-personal statement. It's like I put all of these little bits together, hopefully in a way that can be understood by somebody else. Not necessarily logically, but visually.
Well, there's been a drastic change over the years in your painting, that's for sure. Just this wall with the different images makes for a very interesting statement, in my opinion. I think that it's always nice to see an artist evolve through things and change, not just stay at one thing forever. We talked a little while ago about Riopel and how his paintings have changed, and that's basically what you're talking about here.
Yeah, they don't change by just keep going, they don't go off in one direction and keep changing and going in that direction. They keep doubling back, and it all seems to come around full circle. You're always working with a revamped version of what you've worked before.
Yeah. Well, you've had a very interesting career. You're not that old. You're only 42 years old, and you've had a tremendous number of exhibitions in Canada and outside Canada, and you've developed a very strong reputation. How has this changed you as a person? Do you think you've changed at all, or do you think things are very much the same?
I just see things as being the same. I don't know if all of that stuff changes you at all. It just sort of exists out there behind a sheet of glass. It's not part of your history, right? It's a part of something else.
So you're talking about taking a trip possibly to France in the near future?
I'll be going to Japan and China next month, and then I'm hoping to spend part of next year in Paris.
Yeah, that should be fabulous.
Yeah, if the weather's nice.
Yeah, for sure. Well, listen, I'd like to take this opportunity to, first of all, thank David Bolduc for this fabulous exhibition. It really is a tremendous show, and we'd certainly like to encourage you to take time to come to our gallery in Hess Village and take in this exhibition. It really is a very, very powerful exhibition of beautiful works. The exhibition continues into November. And again, David, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ron.
And thank you very much.